This episode of The Clear Out was recorded late at night on the 3rd of May 2022 at home in Wicklow. And it is episode 50. Episode 50. Well done. Well done if you've stayed with me. And well done to me for staying with myself. It ain't easy, I can tell you. This episode is a hard lean into Puritanism and persecution and contrition and atonement and piety and sanctimony, and it all comes from a starting point of addiction. My own addiction really is the main driver of what I'm talking about today. My addiction to sugar, and the little catalyst was a family dispute here in #blessed over my daughter's sugar intake, and I'll elaborate more in the episode. But it got me thinking about Puritanism and the judgment of those who are perceived to be impure and the desire to make them pay. And ultimately I get to quite an in-depth discussion of Arthur Miller's The Crucible and the McCarthy era communist witch hunts that took place in the 50s in the United States. I also look at Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds and look at the persecution of Jews during the Second World War. And yeah, it's a bit of a whopper. It's a bit of a bumper episode because there was just a lot of meat to get into and to try and digest and understand, but I think it's really good. I think it's a really good episode, and there were a few other things that occurred to me after I recorded, other areas that I could have gone into. I realized I could have spoken about how Puritanism is also a fear of godlessness, and I was wondering what's that look like today, because I was comparing the Puritanism of the Crucible and of certain historic eras of the past with modern cancel culture and woke culture, and how that has a very puritanical streak and a very puritanical zeal running through it and carries with it the desire to punish others. And I'm not sure what God is being worshipped there, the God of subjectivity, the god of hypersensitivity. I don't know. Anyway. I go into it more in the episode, and also I could have dwelled a bit longer on the nature of informing, and that the implication of informing on one's, what it says about one's conscience, or the pressure it puts on one's conscience, because the idea of conscience is something that I discuss in this episode quite a lot as well, and I didn't sort of explicitly explore that, like the personal cost to inform on others, to betray others, which is so brilliantly dealt with in The Crucible and in the Tarantino movie Inglourious Basterds. I also didn't think more about how addiction can be explained in these same terms of persecution. And Arthur Miller, you'll hear later, talks about the concocted terror that forces people, or convinces them that they can hand over their conscience. And so I was thinking about it in addiction terms, and the terror involved in addiction is the terror of doing without, the terror of being straight or being clean, and that becomes a persecution of itself. and so one hands over one's conscience and becomes a slave to that to which one is addicted. So I mean, there's just 3 areas I could have gone into more, I realised, but it would have made it an extra 45 minutes, and it's already a monster episode. But then, as it happened, I thought, well, you know what, it's episode 50, why not go long? Why not indulge? And I think as well, a factor was I recorded it very late at night, and you'll hear it in my voice at the start of the episode. I sound woozy. I sound almost drunk, and it was just fatigue. I taught karate earlier that day in my daughter's school, and I nearly, lost my voice. So I was just kind of, it was a tired voice. I think it settled into its normal timbre by the end of the episode. But anyway, keep an eye out for that. So look, here it comes. Get into it, enjoy it, and as I said at the top, thank you so much for sticking with the podcast if you have done so for the last 49 episodes, and here you are for number 50. We're almost at the we're almost about to celebrate a birthday, the birthday of the podcast. So thanks again, and enjoy the episode. I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. That's a great start. I don't know why I'm laughing. Sometimes that emphatic high with which I begin each episode of The Clear Out, it just hits my funny bone, because there's something incredibly I don't know, pompous. Hi, Dara Clear here. Anyway, enough frivolity. We're about to get into something very serious. This week's episode is going to be an exploration of conscience, and this only came to me earlier this evening, because I'm actually recording this at night, which is not my usual habit. But it seems that this is the only natural opportunity that I've been presented with to record this week. So I need to strike. I need to strike now, or strike not at all. There's a definition of conscience right off the bat. I need to strike now or not strike at all. A zero-sum game. To do or not to do, to be or not to be. Nice. Going to bring in the Shakespearean reference right off the bat. Yeah. So before I go into the whys and wherefores, is it noteworthy that this is episode 50? That is a milestone, I think. I had been, I've been anticipating getting to this number, and I kept thinking, I'll let 50 slide by. 52 surely will be the one, because that'll be a full year of the podcast. So every week for 52 weeks, I will have managed to put out the show, put out the tell, as I wish to refer to it from now on. Not the show, it's the tell, because there's nothing to see here, folks. There's nothing to see. Just listen to the tell. But in fact, then I was reflecting on it before I pressed record. In fact, it should be episode 53. That should be the celebratory one. Episode 53 will be the birthday. It'll be the 1 year anniversary of the show. So in any case, I mean, it would seem that I'm starting to celebrate already. 50. That seems to be the I've heard other podcasts acknowledge their 50th episode. But that's it. That's all I'm going to say. 50, the half century has been reached. That's not insignificant in Test cricket. To score a half century gives a batsman or a batswoman a certain credibility. It shows that they've got something. They've got something to offer. It's a teaser, because really the century is the ultimate. To score a century in Test cricket really is a statement of what? Of discipline, of excellence, of, in a way, of above all else, it is a statement of concentration, because that is the ultimate challenge for a quality Test bats person. If they can stand at the crease for hundreds of deliveries, hundreds and hundreds of deliveries, because that's what it takes. In most cases, that's what it takes to score a century of runs, 100 runs. It requires patience. It requires judgment, being extremely judicious in one's shot selection. I speak merely as a part-time spectator, a part-time fan. But this is what people criticize in the modern batsman. And I'm not a student of the women's game, but the modern batsman often seems to lack discipline and lack patience, lacks the ability to just to last an innings, to sit in there and block, defend, spoil, and wait for the right ball with which to score runs, because the modern batsman has grown up on shorter forms of the game and isn't respecting or honouring the legacy of Test cricket and Test batsmen of yore. Anyway, that was an unexpected digression. Episode 50 is about conscience. And it was earlier today that this idea popped in my head, because where did this all start? It started with a bit of a domestic dispute between my wife and my daughter over the consumption of sweets. That would be lollies for any Australian listeners, or candy for those of you who may be tuning in from the US of A. Yes, it would appear in recent months, my daughter, who is 8.5, her sweet tooth has been activated. Now, prior to this, it's not like she hasn't enjoyed sweet things, but it has struck myself and my wife that her sweet tooth seems to have kicked on a gear. Now, there's gonna be a bit of circling back, and again, in the spirit of the general tenor of the podcast, a circling back to sort of embrace a certain amount of honesty, and in that confessional bent of mine, I have to put my hand up straight away and going, my daughter is the daughter of a sugar addict. That's right. This is all gonna come into the mix today. Really, it took me until I was about 40 years old to address in a serious way my relationship with sugar. And the reason I was addressing that relationship is because I'd had to go through some excruciating experiences in the dentist's chair. and hand over excruciating amounts of money to pay for the excruciating experience. And I just thought, hold on a second here, this isn't going to work. And maybe around that same time, as part of a bit of a shift in how I was sort of minding myself and managing myself and trying to put some new habits in place, I seemed to have a bit of an epiphany and looked at my sort of, I suppose I was about to use the word dependency, my dependency on sugar, my relationship to sugar and sweets, and how I would use them as a sort of a comfort blanket, and would sit down with my other great comfort blanket, which is movies. I'd sit down to watch a movie or two on my laptop late at night, and I might have a bag of opal fruits, latterly known as Starburst. I might have a bag of Skittles. I don't know, sugary, chewy candies, lollies, sweets. I mean, I'm a guy who literally used to eat bags of fizzy sugar. Well, that was my go-to, my number one confection of choice was a product known as a dip dab. A dip dab, which was basically a paper bag of sherbet, powdery, fizzy sugar. And in that bag of sherbet was a lollipop, a rectangular shaped, strawberry flavoured lollipop. And I would gleefully consume dip dabs, bags of dip dabs, one after another. Its cousin, the sherbet fountain, which was a cylindrical package out of which protruded a sneaky stick of licorice, or licorice if you prefer. That was a cylinder, a paper cylinder full of fizzy sugar sherbet, and you'd dip your you'd dip your licorice stick in the white powder and suck that stick until you'd be left with this little stump of sticky licorice, and be kind of tipping the last bit of sherbet onto it. A great combination. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, I'm jumping across myself here, but I mean, this is, you can hear the way I'm speaking. This is the cadence and the emotional response of an addict. I mean, I'm already feeling this kind of frisson of nostalgia, of appetite as well. And this is surely how people, and I mean, it feels, I feel like I'm cheapening or lessening the seriousness of addiction to more serious substances or more adult substances, as in obviously alcohol or drugs. But one can be addicted to sugar, of course. And the way I can visualize those products that I just described. And not only that, but I can instantly recreate in my mind the sensation of that sherbet dissolving on my tongue. And believe me, it doesn't make me shudder. If anything, I have a shiver of pleasure as I recall that fizz and dissolve over my taste buds. And you're thinking, yeah, cool, that's all, that's normal enough. You probably had a lot of those guys when you were a kid. Yes, I did. But believe me, I had a friend go back to Ireland when I was in Melbourne, and she said, can I bring you anything back from Ireland? And I said, yeah, get me some dip dabs. So I was in my 30s, and she was bringing me back Dip Dabs from Ireland. So what I'm trying to say is, when my daughter is sort of displaying an evident interest in consuming more sugary products, a certain alarm bell goes off in me. And she and my wife had a little tete-a-tete earlier today over this very topic. You know, are you eating too many treats? Is usually our word of choice when we're describing anything in that area. And my daughter will be like, "Can I have a treat? Any chance I could have a treat?" And you know, by my standards, I look at my daughter and go, "My goodness, this is one extremely abstemious and controlled consumer of sugary products." Because my daughter will typically have one or two little things a couple of times a day, maybe, if even that. I mean, I'm talking like that would be at the weekend, and on a school day, she would have a treat when she comes home from school. But today, my wife collected her from school, and my daughter persuaded my wife to allow her to get something from the shop, and then my daughter has to come face to face with her big dilemma. She goes into a shop now. My daughter and I had an amazingly fun day in Dublin a couple of weeks ago during the Easter holidays. We had a great day trip to Dublin, and we took in a lot of good stuff, and a gallery and a museum, and my daughter had some money that had been burning a hole in her pocket, and we went to a big toy shop, and she got some toys that she wanted to get, and we had refreshments in a fancy hotel, and at the end of the day, my aunt and uncle took us out to dinner in a nice little Italian restaurant. It was really just a great, great day, and testament to how great the day was. The following day, when we were just mooching around at home at #blessed, my daughter was quite flat, and she was flat because the fun day was over, and she didn't want it to end. And yeah, it was. And I said, "Look, don't worry. We'll go again. We'll go again, and we'll bring Mama the next time we go." But it was really nice. It was her first time in Dublin, being old enough to really kind of take it in and enjoy the experience. And of course, selfishly, I loved it because it was a father and daughter day, and it really couldn't have gone any better. And it was really nice to be her guide and her chaperone. And yeah, it was really we don't do that a lot, and haven't had the opportunity to do that a lot, so it was quite special. Now, why am I mentioning that though? Because why? No, there was some connective tissue. I've just lost myself in a fatherly reverie. There was a reason for bringing up the day trip to Dublin. What was it? Gosh, I don't know. There were some treats that day. Is that why I was mentioning it? We had donuts. There was a fizzy lemon drink, Fanta, which I read just the other day is no longer going to be produced or available on the market here in Ireland. No great loss. I was never really a Fanta man. I always liked Club, which is an Irish producer of soft drinks. Club Orange or Club Lemon was my soft drink of choice, my fizzy drink, my soda of choice. But anyway, that's why I was mentioning. I know why. The dilemma my daughter experiences when she's faced with a large range of things that she knows she's been given the permission. Yeah, go ahead, get yourself something. And she gets frozen by, oh my God, what should I pick? And I was laughing earlier today because she was getting, she was getting quite stressed because my wife was quite annoyed with her over the sugar consumption, and it was just a bit of a family moment. And my daughter was getting a bit upset, and she was having a bit of a cry, and she was being quite contrite, and I was trying to console her. And again, I have to rush in here and go, I don't think my daughter's sugar consumption is excessive. And I'm going to draw a line back to this as the discussion continues. I do not think my daughter's sugar consumption is excessive, but I'm happy in my attempts to be a responsible parent to keep an eye on it, and to certainly plant the seed with her that it's a good idea to consider alternative snacks, alternative less unhealthy snacks at times, and just to raise that little flag with her so she can take some responsibility for it herself. In any case, she when we were talking about it earlier, and things were a little bit tense and there was a bit of crankiness going around, and I was pointing out, well, yeah, you find it difficult when you're in a shop to choose something. And like my wife and I would probably have a little bit of an old school position of, listen, you should just be grateful you're getting anything because we are the products of our own parenting. And we both kind of throw back to, very much older times when, have a biscuit and, be very grateful that you're getting anything at all. And we've probably have a little bit of that in our own parenting approach with our daughter. But my daughter, when she was getting a bit upset, she was saying, yeah, it's really difficult because there's lots of things I see in the shop that I'd really like to get, but they're Nestle products. They're Nestle, and I can't get Nestle. Now, if there may be a couple of you out there listening to this who know me quite well and have known me for some time, and you might know that, or you might remember that I have been conscientiously boycotting Nestle products for 30 years. I signed some petition when I was in university, and some Nestle Nestle sort of behavior, some actions of Nestle, some very dubious, unethical actions of Nestle were brought to my attention, and ever since then I've been like, nah, I'm not going to knowingly spend money on Nestle products. And I laid the incidents out for my daughter at some point in the recent past, and my daughter's latched onto it. And now she faces the torture of going into a sweet shop and going, oh my goodness, like 40% of the products here I can't buy because I'm not going to buy a Nestle product. And she's 8, and she's got to wrestle with this kind of moral dilemma. And I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I should just absolve her of that burden and go, listen, you let your own conscience dictate what you should do. So this got me thinking earlier, and it's what has led me to today's theme. Because there was a part of me that was thinking earlier, my first thought around this topic of eating treats and sweets and lollies and candy and chocolate and sugary things, there's a part of me that goes, okay, let's not get too hysterical about this, because we are not trying to administer some puritanical regime. We're not trying to exert this puritanical power and impose strictures and an extremely ascetic regimen on ourselves or on our daughter. So that was my first thought. My first thought was, this is, we're not Puritans. We're not trying to live some, extremely pure, beyond reproach life. And that was my initial thought. And that thought got me thinking about Puritanism. And I think my next thought was, the frame around cancel culture, which I've spoken about a few times, and I spoke about very recently. 2 episodes ago, I was talking about cancel culture, woke culture, identity politics, and I was discussing it in terms of what society tolerates and doesn't tolerate, and what we should and shouldn't tolerate. And I argued that cancel culture was extremely juvenile, a very juvenile form of morality, the extreme intolerance of shutting people out, of no platforming people. And when I was thinking about Puritanism earlier, I was going, yeah, of course. I mean, it's a very puritanical, driver, beneath cancel culture. And there's a very puritanical driver informing a lot of woke commentary, highly precious, highly subjective, and something I'll touch on a little bit later. It can take on a certain religiosity and a certain piety that begins to resemble not tolerance and not a diversity of thinking, a diversity of understanding, but in fact a very prohibitive and prescriptive way of thinking and understanding and engaging with society and with the world. And so, yeah, so I was jumping, my brain was kind of moving to that territory. But then again, I was just thinking of this idea of Puritanism and wanting to appear to be right, and wanting to appear to be pure, and then how Puritanism can be informed by a certain zealotry, a certain religious zeal, a certain adherence to religious values or spiritual values, and that adherence becomes it becomes a vehicle or a pathway to a self-appointed superiority and a self-appointed higher position from which judgment is passed down. And of course then we get into areas of once you have judgment being passed down, you get into areas of guilt and contrition and shame and atonement, and things start to take on very religious notes and very sort of fundamentalist notes and very extreme notes of intolerance. And I mentioned being subjective earlier, but subjective not only in perspective and one's subjective viewpoint, but also subjective in terms of subjecting people to judgment, and subjecting victims or subjecting penitents to punishment, as the road to atonement, as the road to forgiveness, as the road to purification. Now, as I talk this through and lay it out, I mean, all of this stuff makes me want to scream. I feel very resistant to a lot of these notions, and yet, it's funny. I was jokingly sort of thinking to myself, well, it's probably how my 3 brothers perceive me, as the sort of as the Puritan. Arguably, my parents perceive me this way also, because I'm the sole non. I mean, I'm hesitating to say non-drinker because I do drink a little, but I didn't drink at all until I was in my mid to late 20s, and compared to how the rest of my family consume alcohol, I consume in a very a minor way, and as my cousin here at #blessed likes to say, I'm not really a drinker at all, and I don't smoke, I never have, and I don't do drugs, and I never have, unless you want to call sugar a drug, and you want to call caffeine a drug, as some pedants are wont to do. But I'm seen as the the goody two shoes. More on that another time, perhaps. Although I will briefly share one little story from a few years ago. My daughter, when we brought her to Ireland from Australia for her first visit to Ireland, she'd be too young to remember this really, but it's really just to kind of illustrate something here, and I don't know how appropriate this is. However, I'm going for it. So my wife and I brought our daughter home with us to Ireland from Australia for a holiday about 7 years ago, and at that time, and it had very recently happened, my youngest brother found himself as a guest of the state. He was in prison in one of Dublin's most famous prisons, and it was there that we brought my daughter to meet him, and so he could meet her. We visited him as a little group. I think it was my wife, our daughter, myself, and another one of our brothers, my older brother. I think we all went in to visit my youngest brother just to say hello, and he was coming to the end of a sentence and had been out on probation, but had messed up and found himself back in to just finish the remaining time he had to serve. Anyway, grand. Before I went back to Australia, I paid him a solo visit at the prison, and we had a bit of a chat, and for reasons I won't go into now, I had to visit him in a single cell, which was separated by a glass screen. So I was on one side of it and he was on the other, and we had a bit of a chat, and he was talking about the life he anticipated having in the future, and it was quite idyllic, and he was sort of depicting scenes of pastoral hippie bliss, certain hedonistic pleasures still being indulged and enjoyed, and I felt compelled to kind of go, hold on there a second, buddy. How exactly is this going to transpire? How is it going to unfold? I mean, look at where you are at the moment, and up until that point, my brother had been putting on a really a very typical. I'm not trying to throw shade at him or assassinate his character, but his most comfortable mode of interacting with the world leads him to kind of present as being very sort of happy-go-lucky and uncaring of consequences, and there's a certain lingo that he's cultivated over the years that's has a lot of sort of hippie-ish you know, phraseology and new age lingo interspersed with everything he says. So everything kind of is vaguely and generally, you know, positive and pseudo-spiritual and, you know, eco-friendly and, you know, all these different things. And in that moment, I found myself just kind of, and not in an antagonistic way, but just sort of calling bullshit on it and kind of going, hold on a second, let's have a bit of a reality check here. You know, let's look at where you are, and let's look at what the real pathways to that future are, and how likely they are or maybe are not at this point in time. And I clearly touched a nerve, because my brother sort of dropped the that front with which he's more comfortable, and he just looked me, you know, dead in the eye with a very different face and quite a different voice, and just said to me, "Don't project your sobriety onto me." Which I was kind of going, yeah, fair play to you. Like, that's a very unambiguous riposte, and a very clear, this is the boundary and you're not going to cross over it, so back the F away. And then he just sort of resumed from where he had been been before, and carried on. But it was just a very clear red light, red card, come no further, thou shalt not pass. But you know, and so what I was thinking about in terms of, you know, why I mentioned that incident is, I was the Puritan in that scenario, like my Puritanism. Now, I'm not saying, you know, objectively, I'm not saying that I'm living, you know, a puritanical life, but in that moment, that's how my brother perceived it, and perhaps maybe still does perceive it, that I'm the clean living one, the pure one, the one who does lots of exercise, the one who doesn't really put much, you know, in the way of bad things into my system. In fact, my system is so pure that prior to going to Australia, when I was a regular, just to add to the goody two shoes image, I was a regular blood donor here in Ireland, and I haven't resumed that since I became back. Mostly, I think, because of the pandemic. So it's something I'd like to pick up again. I did it when I was in Melbourne as well. But the Irish Blood Donor Service used to ring me and ask me to come in to give neonatal donations. So basically, my blood was so pure that they wanted it for the little babbies, the little neonatal babbies. They're like, get this guy's blood in here. It's unblemished, untinged, untainted. So there you go. Listen, you do what you will with that little bit of information. But yeah, it back to the prison conversation with my brother. I was the Puritan in that situation, and so the feeling is then that for my brother, that I was the one doing the judging. I'm handing down the judgment, and he's basically saying, and he's fully in his rights to do so, don't you judge me, and don't impose your value system on me. And there is something so profoundly righteous and so profoundly resilient and so profoundly admirable in that I just have to take my hat off to my brother in that moment. But yeah, anyway, and I'm gonna go somewhere with this in a second, because someone else has thoughts in this area. So I did say at the start of the episode, I wanted to talk about conscience, and what conscience is, I suppose, and what it leads us to do, and what it leads us not to do, and where it comes from. And it's funny, I think the first time I engaged with the idea was when the vice principal of my secondary school described me as being conscientious. And at the time I didn't know what that meant. And so I looked it up and was like, oh, okay. So fundamentally, if you're conscientious, you're someone who someone who is led by their conscience, or someone who gives a lot of credence to their conscience, someone who thinks morally before they act, I suppose. Now, I suppose when a student is being, when a high school or a secondary school student is being described as conscientious by a teacher, usually that falls into the area of fundamentally you're a good student who does their work and does their homework. I think it's as unimaginative as that. But I can tell you now that coming from that man, I took it very seriously, because he was not a man to be trifled with. So this man, who I have no idea if he's still alive or not. He could well be, but his name was Paddy O'Sullivan, and he was from Cork, and he was not a tall man. In fact, he was a short man, and he walked with a stoop, and that stoop seemed to be the reason he had the nickname Duck. And it's only now, talking about it, that I realise I always assumed that he was the nickname came from the animal, but there's no real reason for that. So maybe it was because he had that little kind of stoop and it's kind of across his shoulders. Maybe that's why he was called Duck, and there was no connection to the beloved water bird. He used to wear a mid-length leather jacket, black leather, and yes, if you associate that, you might associate that with the Gestapo. That wouldn't be an unreasonable connection to make with this particular member of the teaching fraternity, because there was something of the interrogator about him. He was quiet. He was absolutely not to be messed with. He didn't put himself about the place in that sort of avuncular, jovial, friendly way that male teachers can often affect. He was quite unapproachable. Now, as I got older, I realised he wasn't unfriendly at all. Actually, he was quite approachable. But he was a guy who, when he walked into the room, you'd just stand up straight away and show respect. He was also an Irish teacher, and I remember he conducted my oral exam prior to doing the Leaving Cert, the final state exam you do in Ireland, to the qualifying exam that will get you into university. And he was very nice to me and quite complimentary of my Irish. Long fallen by the wayside, sadly. But yeah, he was not someone to be trifled with, and so and a man who wasn't particularly garrulous, so a man of few words. So when he described me as conscientious, I was like, right, that's I took it very seriously. And here I see, you know, referring back to my daughter earlier, I see she's taken on something of this conscientiousness. And she is. I mean, she's a very thoughtful, considerate little person. And that's what I, you know, when I'm thinking about, you know, conscientiousness, that's what I see in her, you know, being considerate and thoughtful and thinking about others. And, you know, earlier when she was feeling, you know, when she was expressing contrition, and there was this kind of moment with my wife and her, and I was just thinking, she doesn't really have to be sorry for anything here. There's, you know, no terrible crime has been committed. And in myself, what I recognize is that I see the absurdity of rules, the absurdity of high moral ground, the absurdity of righteous posturing, the absurdity of being the face of authority. And it's probably something that has always, and I've known this for a long time, I've recognized this for a long time, and it's probably something that's always undermined me as, or something that I've allowed undermine my sense of rightness to be a teacher or to be holding forth about anything. Although clearly it hasn't stopped me doing 50 episodes of this bloody podcast. But you know, to be a teacher and to stand up in front of young people, and to lay down the law and lay down rules and to try and enforce the same, I've always sort of balked at that and resisted it and gone, this is nonsensical. It's preposterous on a level, because I'd look into the eyes of young students and I just see all their wisdom and all their instinctive understanding of the preposterousness of the adult world and adult structures and rules and regulations and walk this way, not that way, and don't talk when I'm talking and respect what I say. And I was doing it today because I was in my daughter's school today teaching karate to little kids. I guess as young as 8, 7, 6, 8 I can't count. 8, 7, 6, 5 5-year-olds. So a room full of hyperactive 5-year-olds, and I'm trying to explain to them concepts of control and respect, and doing the same for the next class of 6-year-olds. And I had to eject a girl from the class who'd struck one of her classmates, a smaller boy. She struck him from behind on the back of his head with this hand technique that we call a chicken beak, you know, a chicken beak strike, where basically the hand is in the fingers and thumb joined together and the wrist bends over, and you've got like a chicken beak effect of like a chicken ducking its head. And this girl was kind of looking at this technique I was showing the class, because I was thinking, I'll go in, they're little, I'll give them some animal related techniques, that'll be fun. And she just, you know, pulled her hand back behind this little, you know, boy's head and just did this perfect chicken beak strike to the crown of his head. So he kind of, ducks down, clutching the crown of his head with this kind of awful grimace and wince on his face, going, what the hell? And I'm just like, get out, to the girl who did it. Now, one part of me is going, well done. What a brilliant execution of that technique. And she had to sit outside on a bench, and that's grand. I laid down the law about we're not going to be hitting each other. You guys aren't at that stage yet. No one's going to put their hands on anybody else. And so the girl in question took her medicine and went out and sat on the bench, and she was putting her shoes and socks back on. And then at the end of the session, I called her back in. So I called her name and, was trying to affect my stern, grown-up voice. And I summoned her back inside. I said, come back in now. And she just said, why? And I was like, no, there's no why. Just get back in here. Which she did. And I'm like, I think she was in the second group, so she was only 6. And I'm thinking, wow. I mean, so much is wrong about the society that just, and I'm representing it. I'm being a representative of this. Again, the Puritan. These are the rules. This is how it should be. Do what you're told. Come in. Don't talk. Stand there. Don't touch. And there's a terrible tragedy in the suppression of personality and the suppression of the individual identity, that I'm being prescriptive and going, you must submit to order. So this is the problem. My conscience in these situations, and this is probably what any student of any age that has ever met me in now 20 plus years of either very conventional classroom teaching in my capacity as a substitute teacher, or in my capacity as an English language teacher, or teaching in a martial arts context. Any student that's stood or sat in front of me recognizes this admission in me, this admission of the joke, in this admission of the absurdity of one person putting themselves in a position of authority, one person putting themselves in the position of knowledge, in the position of expertise, because I just go, no, it's absurd. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I recognize. I mean, I'm not a complete moron. Not a complete moron. Don't get me wrong. I understand that, of course, in any of these teaching environments in which I found myself, at no point have I not had something to offer. At no point have I not had some area of knowledge or some area of experience or some area of relative expertise that I was able to draw upon to bring something to the table. And I always own that and recognize that when I step into a teaching setting. And I'm never ungrateful to be in that position. But there is something in that exchange that I find objectively ridiculous. Now, I'm not sure if I have anything else to say on that very point at this moment, but returning to Puritanism, returning to piety, judgement, punishment. Earlier, when these thoughts first started pottering around my brain, I very quickly thought of one of the great texts of Puritanism. Now, I shouldn't say great text of Puritanism, but one of the great texts of a critique of Puritanism and the hypocrisy of Puritanism. And it is Arthur Miller's The Crucible. And Arthur Miller, the American playwright, who wrote, amongst other things, Death of a Salesman and All My Sons and A View from the Bridge, and may also be famous for at some point being married to Marilyn Monroe. A great American playwright, a great American dramatist. I love his work. And The Crucible was the play that he wrote about the Salem witch hunts that took place in New England in the, what would that have been? Would that have been the 1800s? Maybe a little bit earlier than that, in fact. I'm showing my lack of historical knowledge. But yeah, we're talking about basically the Protestant founding fathers, the puritanical Protestant founding fathers, the pilgrims of the East Coast of America back in the early days of the founding of the American state as we know it now. And The Crucible takes place in Salem, and it takes place in a typical community of the time. And The Crucible is based on historical fact and focuses on this community and a young woman who is found romping in the woods with other young women from the community in states of undress and sort of sexual sort of hysteria. And the scandalized community wants to know, well, how the hell did this happen? You know, is the devil at work here? Because we're all good, God-fearing folk. And the young woman who's singled out as the ringleader, in her state of fear, shifts blame to the wife of a man she had an affair with, and claims that the wife, and not the man, not the husband, the wife is a witch. And so begins this witch hunt and these trials to establish whether people who have had the finger pointed at them are witches, are in the service of the devil, in the service of darkness and immorality. The trials are held to determine if they should be killed or not, and if they're guilty or not. And ultimately, the husband, John Proctor, who is a skeptic about everything that's going on, and who has been sort of slightly iconoclastic, I suppose, and outspoken within the community, and kept his distance from the piety and tried to keep to himself, but is known in a way because of this, is known as a man of conscience. And ultimately he is asked to betray himself to save his life and to save the life of his wife, and he refuses to do so. And it's enormously powerful. It's enormously powerful drama. I was lucky enough to see a great production of it. Probably about 20 years ago in the National Theatre here in the Abbey in Dublin. As I recall, it was Owen Rowe played John Proctor very well. But you could do a lot worse. You could do a lot worse than to watch the movie version, starring Daniel Day-Lewis as John Proctor, Joan Allen as his wife, Winona Ryder as the accusing young woman. I'm trying to remember who directed that, but I think Arthur Miller wrote his own screenplay for it. So that was made, I guess, in the mid to late 90s. And it stands up very well. But in any case, it is, as I say, it's an exploration of moral panic. It's an exploration of what's the phrase I want to use? Man, my brain is failing me. I apologize. I want to, the phrase that describes when the majority just stick together, and in the security of sticking together, victimize and discriminate against those who are seen to be wrongdoers. God, I'm furious with myself. I can't think of. You're probably there going, "This is the phrase you want." This is an indication of me just being a little bit tired and recording later than I normally do. However, the play is a powerful, like a scorching indictment of kind of social hypocrisy and of conspiracies of silence and the lies people tell themselves to keep themselves safe, and how people will be selfish and turn on their neighbours in the pursuit of self-interest and in the pursuit of survival. And Miller wrote the play in the 50s, at the time in America when anti-communist feeling was at an all-time high. And this was in the wake of the Second World War. This was part of the kind of Cold War dynamics and the culture war between the free West and the communist East, the two superpowers, America and the USSR, being waging this kind of ideological warfare. And the trickle down in the States was this intense anti-communist, anti-socialist fervor, which was coming down from sort of the right wing in America, the sort of the waspy Anglo-Saxon establishment. And the House for Un-American Activities was established to prosecute un-American agents and un-American individuals. And many people were targeted and many people were pressurized, and particularly within the arts, people were being pressurized to give names and to give up members of the Communist Party or people who were suspected of being communists. And it was incredibly bitter and acrimonious, and some people infamously turned over and gave names. And a director I very much admire, Elia Kazan, was one of those figures who volunteered and cooperated and gave names of colleagues to the House of Un-American Activities, and to Joseph McCarthy, who was driving the puritanical crusade, which was based on a sort of a moral panic and moral terror, and full of righteousness and piety and judgment and an implication of moral superiority, and a sort of an insistence on probably a very demonstrated Americanism that was a rejection of anything leftist, socialist, communist. And, you know, the assumption has always been that the Crucible, Arthur Miller's The Crucible, was a response or a reaction to this, and a response and a reaction to that time in American history. And I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to share Miller's own thoughts on this. But Miller fundamentally has said that his interest had always been there in Salem, and his interest in the witch trials in Salem had always been there, because he was interested in this idea of the individual sacrifice and the individual sort of submission to terror that would allow an individual to surrender their conscience and thereby surrender their individuality and their identity. And that was the area that interested him, and that interested him. And it was that the McCarthyism and the House of Un-American Activities and the sort of communist panic, that was just a sort of a coincidence of the time, but it did lend itself, I suppose, like it certainly gave a strong backdrop to the play, and it definitely coloured how the play was perceived and received. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to read to you Miller's own words on the sort of the driving idea behind The Crucible. So what he said was, "If the reception of All My Sons and Death of a Salesman had made the world a friendly place for me, events of the early 50s quickly turned that warmth into an illusion. It was not only the rise of McCarthyism that moved me, but something which seemed much more weird and mysterious. It was the fact that a political, objective, knowledgeable campaign from the far right was capable of creating not only a terror, but a new subjective reality, a veritable mystique, which was gradually assuming even a holy resonance. The wonder of it all struck me, that so practical and picayune a cause, carried forward by such manifestly ridiculous men, should be capable of paralysing thought itself, and worse, causing to billow up such persuasive clouds of mysterious feelings within people. It was as though the whole country had been born anew, without a memory, even of certain elemental decencies which a year or two earlier no one would have imagined could be altered, let alone forgotten. Astounded, I watched men pass me by without a nod, whom I had known rather well for years. And again, the astonishment was produced by my knowledge, which I could not give up, that the terror in these people was being knowingly planned and consciously engineered, and yet that all they knew was terror. That so interior and subjective an emotion could have been so manifestly created from without was a marvel to me. It underlies every word in The Crucible. And so, you know, if it isn't clear from what you just heard, what Miller is really focusing on is the premeditated nature of the persecution and the premeditated nature of the presented threat and the resultant terror in those who were victimized. And that's something that he recognized existed in Salem as well. Going on the historical records, he cites not finding evidence of decency and compassion and human sympathy in accounts of the trials from that time. So, yeah. I'm still trying to think of that phrase from before. That's eluding me. And further to that, also from Miller, what he says is, in this same area of Puritanism and in this same debate around the persecution of the individual and what people were willing to sacrifice, he says, above all horrors, I saw accepted the notion that conscience was no longer a private matter, but one of state administration. I saw men handing conscience to other men and thanking other men for the opportunity of doing so. And it was from that he seemed to want to create a play that was extremely incisive, extremely sharp, and extremely critical of the cynical morality, the hypocritical morality of those leading a campaign of terror. And what I was thinking as I was reflecting on this earlier, just trying to kind of do a tiny bit of research before I pressed record, Miller cites Salem, but I found myself thinking that as, Miller being a Jewish man, and, a Jewish man of age in the mid-20th century, who, and as a Jewish American who only avoided serving in World War II because of a sports injury, I found myself thinking, surely his views must have been informed by the Second World War and Nazism and Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich and the Final Solution and the persecution of Jews and the, did I say Holocaust already? The Holocaust, the again, the systematic, prescribed acting out of moral persecution. And I just found myself thinking, surely that must have been in the mix somewhere. Now, in what I've read, I couldn't find Miller acknowledging that influence or that backdrop. And I mean, he wrote The Crucible in the 50s, so I mean, the war was probably had only ended, less than 10 years earlier. But surely that was in the mix. And if you think of how Jewish people had to hide their religion, had to hide their faith, had to hide the signs that that was their identity, and that they hid it and subsumed it to try and survive. That is surely the parallel with what Miller was talking about, and that's the parallel that's acted out in The Crucible. That's the parallel that was there to be seen in the mid-50s with members of a lot of members of the kind of the arts professions in Hollywood. And incidentally, Arthur Miller refused to cooperate, and I can't remember. I can't remember what the cost was to him. Oh, he was blacklisted for a year, I think, as well. But he refused to cooperate with the House of Un-American Activities and refused to cooperate with Joseph McCarthy. And if you're interested to explore that in that period in American history, you could seek out the George Clooney film from, I think it's 2004? Good Night and Good Luck, which is based on the real historic events of the TV journalist Ed Morrow, was that his name? Going toe-to-toe with Joseph McCarthy and challenging him, and I think ultimately being successful in discrediting him. George Clooney made a very good-looking black and white movie in 2004 called Good Night and Good Luck, which looks into that and makes those characters come to life very dramatically and in a very satisfying way. But to go back to the idea of Nazism and the Jewish persecution, the movie that came to mind, and of course there's so many, but I mean you could talk about that, the old black and white one, The Mortal Storm, James Stewart and Richard Widmark, I think. I've got that right. No, wait, or is it Robert Stanwyck? I think Robert Stanwyck. But never mind that. I was thinking of Inglourious Basterds, the Tarantino movie from 2009. And it's a movie I don't love. Some people rate it very highly. I thought and I may have said this before on the podcast, I think basically if you removed all the American actors from the movie, you'd have a very good film. But I found the American actors, and Brad Pitt chief among them, they just kind of gurned their way through the movie, just with these kind of grating, egregiously over the top, scenery chewing performances, which just weren't that interesting. Whereas all the non-American actors did really good work. And I include like Michael Fassbender, even Mike Myers, because he's Canadian, not American. But the opening sequence is phenomenal. The opening scene of the movie is one of the best things Tarantino's ever done, in my opinion. And in that, you have this chilling scene where a little cavalcade of Nazi officers and soldiers arrive at this beautiful French farmhouse. And I shouldn't say officers plural, it's one officer played by Christoph Waltz, who is the chief Jew hunter in the world that Tarantino creates for the movie, set in World War II. And yeah, Christoph Waltz plays the chief hunter of Jews, and he arrives at this farmhouse having been given reliable information that at that farmhouse there are Jewish people being hidden, being protected by collaborators. Collaborators with the resistance. But the collaborators were the collaborators collaborate with the Nazis. Does it work both ways? So it's just this chilling, tense scene where the German officer lays out his sort of, really repugnant. I'm saying that as the audience member, we're repelled and repulsed by his distaste and his revulsion of Jewish people, and he compares them to rats, to vermin, but ultimately he forces the French farmer to concede that they are indeed there, hiding under the floorboards upon which they sit. And there is a dramatic and horrible execution from above by multiple Nazi machine guns. But it is a brilliant scene, and again, what it does is it thinking about, again, the idea of Puritanism and judgment from above and moral superiority, and in this case the belief in racial superiority. This lends itself to the Puritanism, and it lends itself to this discussion of conscience and what should and shouldn't be done. And in the case of the Tarantino scene, the French farmer has acted on conscience and has tried to protect the righteous people, the victims of of Nazi terror, but ultimately he has to save his family and put their safety above that of the Jewish people are trying to hide, and he has to make that choice. and he has to give in. He has to give in to the terror of, even though it's wrong and he knows it's wrong, he has to give in to the terror. Well, if I don't do this, I'm going to be killed. So it's rather them than me. And is that the lesser of two evils? Should he have sacrificed his family as well? That is for each individual to decide, and that's the burden of conscience. Because ultimately, there's only one person who lives with the acts of their conscience, and that's you, and that's me. Just ordinary people. And to return to Miller's point, that was one of the things that astonished him and disappointed him, that people that he had previously had a relationship were now not even acknowledging him in the street, because they had been completely negated by the terror of being put before the terror of being put before those who would judge them and publicly punish them and prosecute them. And Miller expressed that in those terms of seeing men hand over their conscience to the state or to state administration and handing it over to other men and being grateful to them for allowing them to do so. And if I return to my point then about the machinery of Nazism as our model for a machinery of persecution, how many Germans or Nazi collaborators handed over their conscience to Hitler, to Nazi ideology, to state doctrine? How many people just put their conscience on hold for the duration of the war? The war that was built upon this idea of, wiping out an entire race of people for the betterment of the German state and the Third Reich. And I think that is Miller's ultimate point, and why he makes John Proctor the true moral hero of the Crucible, is because his conscience dictates he will not besmirch himself by lying about what he believes, and he will not besmirch his name. And that's, again, one of the dramatic lines from the play, that, that's all I have is my name, and I'm not going to sully it by pretending to be something I'm not, just to satisfy the hypocrites, the moral hypocrites. And therefore, the true act of conscience, especially when the stakes are as high as they can be, life or death, that is a profound assertion of identity, and it's a profound assertion of courage. And hearkening back to the story about my brother earlier, it's admirable to the point of being very moving, inspirational, and instructive. So there you go. So here are two quotes about conscience. One from Mark Twain, so you should rightly expect something humorous. And he says, "A clear conscience is the sure sign of a bad memory." which I like a lot. I am beyond reproach. What about this thing? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Okay, I'm not beyond reproach. In slightly less humorous terms, in more psychological terms, Freud said, conscience is the internal perception of the rejection of a particular wish operating within us. I'm going to read that one again because that requires a second listen, I think. Conscience is the internal perception of the rejection of a particular wish operating within us. So that's tricky, as you would expect with Freud. So his argument is that the wish is in us to do something. There's a desire in us to do something that we recognize is bad. And our conscience is the alarm system that flags it and goes, hold on a second here. Now, that's challenging because I think the way a lot of us understand conscience is I don't have the desire to do that thing because I'm a good person. And my conscience signifies to me that I'm a good person because I recognize that it's bad and therefore I don't want to do it. Now, using Freud's construction, it would seem he's arguing, as he would, bloody Freud, he's arguing that, oh no. The desire is there. The desire to transgress. I mean, Freud's all, after all, this is a guy who bases his entire psychology on the fact that, all men want to sleep with their mothers. So he's all about the transgressive desire is there in all of us, right from the beginning. So his argument is, typically everything is about repression. It's all about repressed desires. And of course, and I'm going to try and wrap this up because this is going quite long. Of course, that idea of repressed desires and repressed impulses and the repressed shadow, the repressed darkness within, this is what Puritans and puritanical judgment thrive on. Because, and this is where the hypocrisy comes in. The Puritans go, this is where we'll get that guy because we know he has that stuff in him, so let's just bring that out. We'll bring that out under duress, and finally he'll confess, and then we can kill him. Or then we can punish him so severely and eradicate his personality so comprehensively that he will assimilate and become one of us. And of course, the thing is, the only way they recognize and know with such confidence that those desires or those transgressive impulses lie within the other is that they have them within themselves. And that's the hypocrisy. So, I mean, that speaks to some other things I spoke about recently on the podcast, talking about homophobia. And because my argument was, well, I think a lot of homophobia is based on, repressing the homosexual longing in the homophobic person. I mean, I'm not saying that accounts for every incident of homophobia, but I think it's very much in the mix. And there can be a puritanical aspect to homophobia. The blocking out the sin, suppressing it, squashing it, scorching it, burning it out, killing it. That's a very, it's very puritanical, and brings us back then to what I described earlier as the juvenile morality of cancel culture. We cannot make the world into this sterile place where that only contains the things that we like. Nothing could be more infantile. Nothing could be more ridiculous. It just doesn't work that way, does it? We're just a messy, dirty, mixed up, hypocritical, contradictory species. And we're always going to be. There will be no further evolution. Probably. That's a very dystopian note on which to end the episode. But I feel I must. I feel we must end here. I'm sure I had something else I wanted to say about about wanting to see people suffer. So like that's a part of it as well, to show contrition, and to show a desire to atone seems to come with the puritanical vision, the puritanical mission. So I will punish myself to absolve myself of sin. So the hair shirts and the whipping and living in a very austere way, the black clothes, the spare furniture, architecturally and aesthetically, stuff that's really quite appealing, I think. But what it symbolizes morally, spiritually, not so attractive. But yeah, again, I'm the clean vessel, you're the unclean vessel, and I want you to break yourself to make yourself clean. So if that's not sort of a projected desire to, I don't know what is. And again, just quickly, before I finish, and I'm sure I mentioned this in an earlier episode, I can't remember what the context was, but if you want to see in cartoon form that type of puritanical hypocrisy and that repression, and specifically sexual repression, you should go and watch, and I think it's from like 95, Walt Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, because the religious figure, I can't remember his name, the character's name, is it Frollo? Is that right? I can't remember. There's an extraordinary sequence in the middle of the movie where he is wrestling with his desire for Esmeralda, the gypsy dancing girl, with whom Quasimodo falls in love. And there's this extraordinary sequence in the middle of the movie where the animators sort of bring to life the inner turmoil and the inner dilemma of this extremely sadistic, cruel religious figure, who can barely control his repressed desire for the beautiful Esmeralda, voiced by Demi Moore, maybe. Oh, anyway, whatever. Okay, listen, there you go. I had no idea I was going to go this long or go this far with this, and as ever, I get to this point of the episode and I'm not sure if it's all cohered, but there you go. That was episode 50. You listened to it. I told it. I didn't show it. Thanks for listening to the tell. Conscience, Puritanism, contrition, atonement. Always a fun ride here at #blessed. And it all started with a squabble and a family discussion over the consumption of sweets, lollies, candy. There you go. You can throw me some love on social media if you so desire. Don't repress that desire. Don't be a Puritan about it. Show me some love on social media. The Clear Out podcast is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. The Clear Out 2 is on Twitter. You can email me at theclearoutlive@gmail.com. And wherever you're listening to podcasts and listening to this podcast, you will find in the description a supporter link if you want to make a one-time contribution, financial contribution to this independent podcast, or if you'd like to become a patron and make a small regular contribution to the upkeep of this this tell, you can do so using the Patreon link, which you'll also find wherever you're listening. But that's patreon.com/theclearout. So there you go. Thanks for listening, and thanks to those of you who've reached out to express appreciation for last week's episode, which was about the deep respondent self. I really, God, it's great. It's great to hear from people when you've enjoyed something I've put out there. It means a lot to me. It motivates me to keep on rocking. Yeah, And look at, if you don't like the show and you think I won't reach out and that'll demotivate him and he'll stop, guess again. It ain't gonna happen. I'm not gonna stop. I'm gonna keep doing it. So there you go. Regardless. Okay, thanks for listening. Take care. Be good to yourselves. You know, let that repressed stuff get out and breathe. Don't hold on too tight. Don't hold on too tight. I think that's the message ultimately of this week's episode. Don't hold on too tight. Let it go. Loosen up a little. Live a little. Be good. You know, but not too good for God's sake, because that's no fun at all. Don't forget to laugh at the joke that we're all a part of. Yeah? Okay, beautiful. Okay, take care. Mind yourselves. I'll talk to you soon. All the best. Bye.